Ryan and I sat frozen on the floor. The silence between us thickened until it became almost physical. Neither of us spoke, but every second felt like it was pulling us toward something we weren't ready to confront. Then, a sound. A sharp, sudden thud from somewhere outside the room. I turned instantly. Ryan didn't. Instead, he closed his eyes slowly, like he already expected it. What was that? I whispered. Don't, he murmured. Just stay here. But I couldn't. My curiosity was louder than his warning. Ryan, someone might be. No one's here, he said with a strange certainty. It's not that. Not that, not a person. Then what? Before I could ask, another sound echoed through the hallway. This one was softer. Longer. Almost like something dragging across the floor. My pulse quickened. Ryan tensed, pulling the blanket tighter around his shoulders. Ian, please don't open the door. Why not? Because I know what happens when someone goes looking for answers they're not ready for. He sounded terrified, not for himself, but for me. It was the first time I heard genuine fear in his voice, and that scared me more than the noise itself. But I couldn't just sit there. I stood up slowly. Ryan rose too, instinctively grabbing my wrist, not rough, not painful, just desperate. What are you doing? He whispered harshly. I swallowed hard. We need to check. What if it's my mom? What if she came back early and slipped? His expression flickered. For a moment, he seemed to consider it. Then he shook his head. No. She would have called. That's not her. His grip on my wrist tightened slightly before he forced himself to let go. Fine, he said quietly. If you're going, I'm coming with you. We stepped out of the guest room together, the hallway stretching ahead like a tunnel of muted shadows. The sound had stopped, but the stillness felt wrong, heavy, almost suffocating. Where did it come from? I asked. Of the living room, he said. He didn't sound confused. He sounded certain. How do you know? He hesitated. I just know. We walked slowly, footsteps soft on the cold floor. My hand brushed the wall to steady myself. Ryan walked closer than necessary, close enough that I felt the warmth of him when everything else felt cold. When we reached the living room, the lights flickered yet again, once, violently, and then the room plunged into darkness. I heard Ryan inhale sharply. Ian, he whispered, stay still. I froze. Something creaked nearby, the sound of weight shifting on old wood, but no form moved. No silhouette appeared, just the empty dark. I forced myself to speak. You heard it too, right? Yes, he whispered. Then what is it? A long pause. I don't know, he said. That's the problem. He took a slow step closer to where the center table should be and reached his hand out blindly. I followed his silhouette, watching the faint outline of his fingers skim the air like he expected something to be there. I whispered, why aren't you more scared? He let out a tight, humorless breath. Because this isn't new to me. That sentence hit me like ice. I turned sharply toward him. What do you mean? He lowered his hand. Even in the near dark, I could see his expression shift, fear, guilt, hesitation, all tangled into something deeply human. Ian, you need to listen, he said quietly, voice strained. I didn't come here just because I needed a place to stay. I came because I couldn't stay where I was. Why? His jaw tightened. He looked away as if the answer itself hurt. Because things kept happening around me. Things I couldn't explain, and people started noticing. He swallowed hard. And now it's happening here. A chill swept through me. Are you saying this is because of you? No, he said quickly. Not because of me. But around me. His voice cracked slightly. I think something's followed me, Ian. The room seemed to darken even more. You're joking, I whispered. Right. I wish I was. The dragging sound returned, this time closer, much closer. Ryan instantly stepped in front of me, instinctively protective. He raised his hand as if prepared for something, though he had no idea what that something was. Stay behind me, he breathed. No, I whispered, stepping beside him. I'm not leaving you alone. He glanced at me, shock flickering across his face, then something softer. Warmer. Something he hid quickly. The sound grew louder. It wasn't footsteps. It wasn't breathing. It wasn't anything human. Then, suddenly, the light snapped back on. The room was empty. Completely. No sign of anything. No movement. No shadow. No explanation, but the center table had shifted. Just slightly. Enough that even Ryan's breath hitched. "See," he whispered, voice trembling. "This is what I meant." My heartbeat thudded violently in my chest. But I still asked the only question that mattered: why didn't you tell me sooner? His eyes softened. "Because I didn't want you to look at me differently." I stepped closer before I realized what I was doing. "And how do you think I'm looking at you right now?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence said everything: fear, confusion, a pull neither of us understood, and something else, something forbidden, standing right at the edge of reason. For a moment, we stood in front of each other, breathing hard, the distance between us shrinking without either of us moving. Then, from the hallway, a loud, sharp crash. We both jumped. Ryan grabbed my arm, pulling me close before he could stop himself. "Ian," he whispered urgently, "listen to me. Whatever this is, it's not done." His breathing was uneven. Mine wasn't any better. His grip tightened just slightly, not enough to hurt, but enough to make my pulse stumble. "You shouldn't be near me," he said, voice breaking. "Not when things like this happen." I stared at him, heart pounding, senses heightened. "Maybe," I whispered back, "that's exactly why I should be." For the first time since he'd moved in, he didn't hide what he was feeling. Not the fear. Not the conflict. Not the pull. And in that moment, with the house trembling under some unseen presence, with danger pressing in from all sides, with everything around us on the verge of falling apart, something shifted, something irreversible, something we couldn't take back, because the real danger was no longer in the hallway. It was right here, between us. If you want, I can continue with the falling action, 600 to 800 words, next, full of aftermath, tension, emotional fallout, and dangerously unspoken feelings. I still remember the way that evening smelled, like wet earth and electricity, the kind of air that warned you a storm was close even though the sky looked deceptively calm. Our street was oddly quiet, too still for a Thursday. The kind of stillness that makes you look over your shoulder, just to make sure you're alone, even when you know you are. I had just returned home from work, exhausted, half-drenched from the drizzle that had started and stopped unpredictably all day. My house, our house, technically, lay dim under the warm glow of the porch light. Inside, everything was exactly where I'd left it: the jacket on the back of the chair, the faint smell of coffee lingering in the kitchen, the soft hum of the old fan in the hallway. Familiar. Safe. Ordinary, except he wasn't home. Elias's shoes weren't by the door, and his keys weren't tossed carelessly on the counter like usual. He was rarely late, never without texting me, but that night, nothing. No call. No message. Just silence that pressed a little too heavily on my chest. I tried to shrug it off. Maybe he'd grabbed dinner with someone from work. Maybe he'd gone for a run. Maybe he'd decided to stay out intentionally, to avoid me. The thought left a pulse of something sharp in my stomach. I shouldn't have cared, not the way I did. Elias was supposed to be off limits from the moment he moved in. My best friend's younger brother. The one person I had promised not to get involved with. But promises are easy when the person in front of you doesn't look at you the way he did that first night, when he stood in my doorway with his suitcase, rainwater clinging to his hair, eyes hesitant but hopeful, when he smiled in that quiet, careful way, like he already knew I was going to be trouble for him. I tried not to think about any of that now. I hung my damp shirt on the chair and walked down the hallway, but something stopped me. A sound. Very faint. Like a drawer closing, or someone shifting their weight carefully on an old wooden floorboard. It came from upstairs. I froze. We lived alone. Just the two of us. No visitors. No pets. No reason for someone to be up there. My heartbeat stuttered once, then twice. "Elias." I called out, voice low, testing the stillness. No answer, but the air felt different suddenly, charged, heavier than before. As if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Or maybe, waiting for me to discover something I wasn't supposed to. I stepped onto the first stair, hesitating. A stupid, irrational part of me wondered if this was what he'd been avoiding telling me. If this was the moment everything shifted. If this was the night I found out what he'd really been hiding and why he hadn't come home. I wasn't sure whether I was more afraid of finding nothing upstairs, or finding him, and if I did find him, what exactly would he say, or worse, What if he wasn't alone? If you'd like, I can continue with the rising action, 1,200 to 1,500 words, next. I still remember the way the air felt that evening, heavy, almost swollen, as if it were holding a secret it didn't want to release. Our family house in the village always had a strange quietness to it after sunset, but that night, the silence felt different, tighter. The kind of silence that makes you listen twice. I had come to stay for a week, something I hadn't done in years. Life had pulled me away, and honestly, so had memories I never found the courage to face again. But when my aunt called, insisting the family needed help preparing for the annual gathering, I couldn't refuse. A part of me wondered if she sensed it, the tension I tried so hard to hide. The thing I never spoke about. The thing we never spoke about. My cousin, Zion, was already there when I arrived. He stood in the courtyard, unpacking crates of decorations as if nothing had changed. As if years hadn't passed. As if the distance between us hadn't been built deliberately, brick by uncomfortable brick. He looked up the moment my car stopped. His eyes locked on mine longer than they should have. A faint smile, too faint, almost cautious, appeared on his face. Long time, he said, wiping his hands on his shirt. Yeah, I answered, even though a dozen other words crowded my tongue. We hugged, but even that felt loaded, like there was a third presence between us, our shared memory, our unspoken history pressing its weight on our shoulders. Inside the house, everything felt unchanged. The wooden cupboards, the faint smell of sandalwood from my aunt's incense, the old clock ticking too loudly in the hallway. These tiny details wrapped around me like vines, pulling me back to a time I had tried so hard to forget. But the real uneasiness crept in when my aunt casually mentioned something that made my chest tighten. Oh, by the way, she said while stirring tea, Zion's been different lately. Quiet. Distracted. Keeps to himself. Her words shouldn't have meant anything. And yet, they did. Later that night, after everyone went to bed, I stepped outside to get some air. The moon hung low, casting pale light across the courtyard. And that's when I heard it, footsteps. Slow, hesitant, almost as if the person wasn't sure whether they should continue. I turned. Zion stood there, half in the shadow of the doorway. You can't sleep either, he asked. I nodded, though the truth was I hadn't even tried. Something had been tugging at me the moment I stepped foot in the house. A strange pull, familiar, dangerous, and completely unwanted. He walked closer, the air tightening with each step. You know, he said quietly, I thought you'd never come back here. There was something in his tone, something buried but alive. Something we had both agreed, without words, to bury years ago. But if it was truly buried, why did it feel like it was rising again? And why, deep down, was I afraid that I already knew the answer? If you want, I can continue with high voltage sign rising action, 1,200 to 1,500 words, next. The house felt unusually quiet that evening, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I pushed open the front door and stepped inside, shaking the last bit of cold air from my jacket. The sky outside had been a deep, bruised purple, the kind that made the streetlights glow earlier than usual. Winter was definitely creeping in. Even the wooden floor under my shoes felt colder than it should have. It was supposed to be an ordinary night, routine, safe, but something felt off, like a puzzle piece had shifted while I was gone, so subtle no one else would notice, but impossible for me to ignore. I stood in the living room for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. Everything looked normal, the soft hum of the heater, the faint smell of laundry detergent from the morning wash, the couch cushions slightly uneven the way he always left them, and yet, my chest tightened with a strange unease. Why does it feel like something is about to happen? I shook the thought away and tried to laugh at myself. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe my mind was looking for drama where there was none. Still, as I walked deeper into the house, I couldn't ignore the tension coiling quietly in the back of my mind. His door was cracked open. A thin line of warm light spilled into the hallway, flickering softly like it was breathing. I paused. He rarely left his door open like that unless he wanted to talk, or unless he wasn't there at all. Hello. I called out gently. No answer. I told myself not to overthink it, but the silence felt heavier than before. A part of me wanted to push the door open. Another part whispered that I shouldn't. That crossing that line, even a small one, could change things in ways I wasn't prepared for. Instead, I moved toward the kitchen. The window above the sink was fogged from the heater, blurring the view of the street outside. I wiped a small circle with my sleeve and stared at the empty road. Not a single car. Not a single person. It's too quiet. Why did that bother me so much? Moments later, I heard the front door close softly. I turned around sharply, heart jumping. He walked in, hair slightly damp, cheeks flushed from the cold, eyes darker than usual. His expression froze when he saw me. "Oh, you're home," he said, voice quieter than normal. Something in the way he looked at me made my stomach twist. There was tension in his shoulders, like he'd been carrying a secret all day and didn't know how to put it down. "Yeah. Just got in," I replied, trying to sound casual. He nodded once and walked past me, but the air between us felt charged, like electricity just before a storm breaks. I watched the way his jaw tightened, the way his hand stayed curled at his sides, the way he didn't quite meet my eyes. What happened to him today? And why did I suddenly feel like it had something to do with me? He paused at his door. Didn't go inside, just stood there. Then he looked back over his shoulder, just for a second, and that single glance carried something I couldn't name, something unspoken, something dangerous, something that would change everything sooner or later. I swallowed hard, and somewhere deep inside me, a question formed. Was tonight really going to be just another normal night? Because suddenly, it didn't feel like it at all. If you want, I can continue with the rising action, 1,200 to 1,500 words, next. The hallway wasn't dark, not completely, but the dim lighting made every shadow look stretched, distorted, unnatural. And there, at the very end of the corridor, a silhouette leaned silently against the wall. Ryan. He wasn't moving. He wasn't even breathing loudly, just standing there, half hidden, watching me. A strange mix of relief and uneasiness rushed through me. "How long have you been there?" I whispered, trying to sound annoyed instead of startled. He stepped forward slowly, hands in his pockets, eyes unreadable. His hair was slightly damp, as if he had just washed his face, and the faint light caught on the edges of his jawline, outlining every sharp, tense angle. "I could ask you the same thing," he said softly. "You look like you saw a ghost." His voice was calm, but something in it sounded off, distant, maybe tired, maybe hiding something. Ryan always used his voice like a mask. Smooth. Controlled. Almost too calm. "I heard something," I muttered. "A noise." "Must have been me," he replied, but he didn't explain what he was doing in the dark hallway. He didn't explain why he didn't answer when I called. He didn't explain anything. Typical. He walked past me, brushing my shoulder, just lightly, but enough to make my pulse stumble. I hated the way my body reacted before my mind did. I hated that it noticed him so sharply, so immediately. "Did my mom talk to you today?" I asked, following him to the living room. "No." "Why?" His tone shifted. "Cautious," she said, "to take care of you." He paused mid-step. I watched the back of his neck tense, the way someone's body tenses when a secret is almost exposed. He turned around, eyes suddenly darker. Not angry, more like he was calculating something. "And what does that mean to you, Ian?" I didn't know. I honestly didn't know. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe my mother just sensed his loneliness. She always did with people who carried unspoken heaviness. Or maybe she knew something I didn't. "Forget it," I muttered, but he didn't look away. "You're scared of me," he said calmly. I blinked. "What?" "No, you are." He took a slow step closer. "Why?" There was no reason. Or maybe too many. His sudden closeness unsettled me, and not because he was dangerous, but because he wasn't. And that somehow made it worse. His presence wasn't threatening, it was magnetic. That was the problem, you're imagining things, I said, stepping back before it became obvious that I needed distance. He didn't push further. Instead, he sat on the sofa, pulling a blanket around his shoulders like he felt cold. He often did, even when it wasn't cold at all. I watched him silently. There were moments when he looked older than his age, not physically, but in the eyes. Like he had seen things he didn't talk about. Things he didn't want to remember. Are you okay? I finally asked. His eyes flicked up. Why? You seem off. He took a slow breath. Do you ever feel like something is following you? Even when you're alone? The question hit me like a cold gust of wind. Why would you say that? No reason, he said too quickly. Just wondering. But his hands tightened around the blanket and his gaze drifted toward the hallway again. A shiver ran down my spine, not fear, but a deeper discomfort. Something unspoken had crept into the house that night. Something between us. Something we both felt but didn't want to acknowledge. I sat down in the chair opposite him. You know, I said carefully, if something's wrong, you can tell me. He laughed under his breath, a humorless sound. What makes you think I'd do that? He wasn't being rude. Just brutally honest. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe because you're living here. Maybe because you don't talk to anyone else. He stared at me for a long moment. You think I don't talk because I don't want to? He asked quietly. Or because I don't trust myself to? I wasn't sure how to respond. Sometimes, he continued, looking down, silence is the only thing that feels safe. Safe from what? My question lingered in my throat, but I didn't ask. Something told me I wasn't ready to hear the answer. Hours later the night dragged on with a strange heaviness. My mother still hadn't returned. Ryan retreated to the guest room without saying anything. And I tried to study, but my mind kept replaying the hallway scene, his voice, that question. Do you ever feel like something is following you? It unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. Around midnight, I went to get water. The house was pitch black except for the faint glow from the streetlight slipping through the curtains. As I passed the guest room, I heard something, a soft thud, then another, like someone shifting restlessly. Ryan. I whispered. No response. I hesitated, then knocked gently. Still nothing. After a moment of indecision, I cracked the door open. The room was dark, too dark. I reached for the wall switch and flicked it on. Ryan sat on the floor beside his bed, knees pulled to his chest, breathing unevenly. His hands were gripping his hair as if trying to steady himself. Hey, I whispered urgently, stepping inside. What's wrong? Are you? He raised his hand a little, signaling me not to come closer. I'm fine, he said through clenched teeth. Just don't. His voice trembled. It frightened me in a way I'd never felt before. He wasn't loud or dramatic. He wasn't panicking. He was breaking, silently, painfully, like someone who had learned long ago how to fall apart without making a sound. Ryan, look at me. He didn't, please. Slowly, he lifted his head. His eyes were glassy, breathing shallow. I didn't want you to see me like this, he whispered. Then you shouldn't have sat alone in the dark. I tried to joke lightly, though my voice shook too. He didn't smile. He didn't even blink. I'm not used to being around people, he said. Especially when things get bad. What things? A long silence. He swallowed hard. I don't sleep well, he finally murmured. And when I do, the dreams don't stay in the dreams. I stepped closer despite his earlier warning. You're safe here. He let out a bitter laugh. No place is safe. Not when your mind is the problem. He pressed a hand over his face, tired and defeated, and for a moment, I forgot all the rules, all the boundaries, all the reasons I was supposed to keep my distance. All I saw was someone who had been strong for too long. Let me stay for a bit, I said gently. Just until you feel better. He hesitated, really hesitated, like he was torn between pushing me away and letting himself lean on someone for once. Okay, he whispered. One word, soft, but heavy enough to shift something deep inside me. I sat beside him, leaving a respectful gap. I didn't touch him. I didn't ask questions. I just stayed. The room remained quiet except for our breathing. Minutes passed. He finally spoke again, voice barely audible. Do you ever want something you know you shouldn't? My heart stopped. The question wasn't innocent. It wasn't random. It wasn't safe, and somehow, he knew exactly what he was asking. I exhaled slowly. Why are you asking me that? Another long pause. He turned his head enough for our eyes to meet, a hesitant, vulnerable, almost forbidden kind of closeness. No reason, he whispered. Just wanted to see how you'd answer. Before I could respond, the lights flickered, once, twice, then steadied again. We both stared up at the bulb. Did you see that? I asked. He nodded. Yeah. A shiver crept down my arms. The house was old. Flickering lights weren't unusual, but the timing, the atmosphere, his question, none of it felt accidental, and for the first time that night, I realized something. Whatever was happening between us, whatever tension, fear, attraction, or unspoken truth, wasn't going away. It was only getting stronger, and more dangerous. If you want, I can now continue with the climactic moment. 800 to 1,200 words, building the peak tension, the taboo emotional turning point, and a dramatic cliffhanger. The crash from the hallway echoed long after it stopped, vibrating through the house like a warning neither of us understood. But in that moment, neither of us moved. We were still standing too close, breathing too hard, trapped in a silence that felt more dangerous than any sound we'd heard that night. Ryan's hand was still on my arm. It shouldn't have mattered. It shouldn't have meant anything, but it did. His touch wasn't tight anymore. It had softened, almost unconsciously, like he hadn't realized he was still holding on. And the way his thumb brushed, barely, against my sleeve made my breath hitch in a way I hoped he didn't notice, but he did. He noticed everything, the fear in my eyes, the tension in my voice, the way I didn't pull away. He swallowed hard, suddenly aware of the closeness between us. He let go as if my skin had burned him. Sorry, he whispered, looking away. His voice cracked slightly, just enough to reveal something raw underneath. Something he'd been trying desperately to hide. I stepped back too, but only because the air felt too heavy. Too charged. The space between us was thick with everything we weren't saying. We should check what fell, I said, though my voice didn't sound like mine. He nodded, pushing his fingers through his hair. His hands were trembling. Yeah. Okay. But neither of us moved. Instead, we stood there in the living room, staring at the hallway as if it held answers we weren't ready to face. The lights, still flickering faintly, cast uneven shadows across the walls. The air felt colder, somehow thinner. Ryan wrapped the blanket around himself again. Not because he was cold, but because he needed something to anchor him. Something to keep him from shaking. He whispered, almost to himself, you weren't supposed to be part of this. My chest tightened. Part of what? He didn't answer. He just kept staring at the hallway, jaw clenched, breathing unevenly. I took a hesitant step toward him. Ryan, the things happening tonight, they're not your fault. He shook his head, slow and defeated. You don't know that. Then tell me, I said softly. Tell me what you're so afraid of. His eyes finally met mine, and I knew, instantly, that he would break if I pushed too hard. There are things, he said slowly, carefully, that I've tried to outrun. Things that don't care where I go or who I'm with. His voice shifted, gentler, almost apologetic. I didn't want you caught in the middle. I didn't want you to think I bring trouble wherever I go. I stepped closer. You're not trouble. He laughed under his breath. A bitter sound. Iron, look around. The house creaked again, a long groaning sound that shivered through the walls. We both tensed instinctively, but still didn't move toward the hallway. Instead, Ryan spoke again, quietly, carefully, each word weighed before he released it. You should hate me right now, he murmured. Why? I whispered. Because I put you in danger, he said. Because I let you get close. Because I didn't push you away even when I knew I should. My pulse thudded painfully in my chest. You didn't push me away, I said. And you don't want to. The room filled with a silence that felt too big. Too real. Ryan's breath caught. His fingers tightened around the blanket. He looked like someone trapped between two impossible choices. Iron, he whispered, don't say things you don't understand. Then help me understand. His eyes closed for a moment, as if the words physically hurt him. When he opened them again, something had changed. Something deeper. Something unrestrained. He took one slow step toward me, not close enough to touch, not close enough to cross any line, just close enough for me to feel the shift. The wait. The pull came, he said again, softer this time. If I tell you what I'm thinking, it's going to make things complicated. They're already complicated. I breathed for a moment. Just one suspended second. He let the mask slip. His expression cracked open, revealing something fierce and vulnerable and entirely forbidden. Diane, he whispered, voice unsteady. I don't want you to regret this. Regret what? He opened his mouth, hesitated, and closed it again. The moment stretched thin between us, trembling on the edge of something irreversible. Then, a loud knock thundered against the front door. We both jolted. Ryan's face drained of color. No, he whispered. Not now. Who is it? I asked, chest tightening. He didn't answer. He didn't move. He just stared at the door like something on the other side was waiting for him specifically. The knocking came again. Louder. More urgent. Ryan, he whispered, voice shaking. Whatever happens next, don't open that door. My breath hitched. Why not? He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on him before, fear mixed with something else. Something heartbreaking, because it's not here for you. The lights flickered violently, the knocking stopped, and the silence that followed was worse than any sound. If you want, I can now continue with the conclusion. Cliffhanger, 400 to 600 words, the dramatic unresolved ending that leaves the audience desperate for part 2.